a lot of people too have difficulty understanding just what is his strategy, and I think you've mentioned in the past that for the first 10 years or so of his pontificate, wasn't it directed towards a geopolitical strategy of bringing down the Iron Curtain?
Yes, it was. Up to 1981, he was persuaded that he had a long reign in front of him and that solution of problems was at a long range. Then he was shot. And as you know, when he lay in Gemelli Hospital in Rome, he had a vision. He had the Fatima vision. He saw it. God revealed it to him. He saw the whole thing. And he suddenly sent for his personal secretary and got the copy of The Secret, which he hadn't studied, and read it. And then he called a famous nun, a very well-known nun who was an expert on Fatima, and sent her to Portugal to talk with Sister Lucia. And when he came out, it was quite obvious that he had another geopolitical purpose in mind. He now knew that he wasn't going to live for a long time, and his papacy wouldn't last a long time. He also knew that Russia was finished, the Soviet Union was finished, but that Russia wasn't. And he set out, therefore, to exercise as much geopolitical influence as he could. But, you see, there was a flaw in his armour. And the flaw was this. He had won through a thing called solidarity. Do you remember the Solidarity organization?
Yes, that was headed by Lech Walesa.
Solidarność. The difficulty is this: the Solidarność was a purely secular movement. Purely secular. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's purely secular. Nothing religious. And he cut his teeth on that organization. That's how they defeated the Stalinists in Poland. That's how they brought Edmund Gierig, the premier, down with the whole government. They were on their knees to him and Cardinal Wyszynski for help. Keep the country safe from the Russians, from the Soviets. When he then started in geopolitics, he still relied on secular organization. He wasn't acting merely and simply through faith, the arms of faith. No, he was doing politics, and it was the geopolitics of reason, not the geopolitics of faith. And by 1989-90, he had become totally immersed in geopolitics of reason. And he was a great friend of Gorbachev's, and he had become very close to the Americans, and he relied on secular movements to bring about spiritual ends. And it didn't happen. It only got worse. Because you see, he made a mistake. The same mistake as Paul VI made, and the same as John the 23rd made. And Bernard, I've asked myself again and again, why the three popes made this mistake. The Queen of Heaven gave a mandate. She said, consecrate Russia to me on one day, all you bishops together, and Russia will be converted to Catholicism. I mean, it doesn't really convert it, it will become Catholic, and Marxism will be finished, and there'll be no chastisement. If you don't do that, my son is going to punish you all. And John the 23rd and Paul VI and John Paul II, all three neglected this. John the 23rd said the children didn't know what they were saying. They thought Russia was a whore in the streets of Lisbon. And anyway, I'm talking with Nikita Khrushchev. This was 1962, and he will allow observers to come to my Vatican Council if I don't condemn Marxism. And therefore John III didn't allow the fathers of the Council to condemn Marxism. And he certainly would not publish he said, we will not publish this letter ever. It will never be published. And I will not consecrate Russia. Because if I did that, Nikita Khrushchev would know, and he'd consider it an act of war. All the bishops, Catholic bishops, gather in a place, 2,700 of them in the Vatican, and they condemn Russian Marxism, Soviet Marxism. Come on, it's war. There's going to be persecution. That's John XXIII's reason. Paul VI simply was afraid of his own shadow, and besides, he didn't believe in Fatima. John Paul II sort of believed in Fatima, sort of. He didn't quite believe in Fatima. And he decided that he couldn't do it because he wasn't the Pope of 1960. And Lucy had originally said the Pope of 1960 must do the consecration. So he did nothing about it. In fact, he permitted the suppression of Sister Lucia and permitted the suppression of the message of Fatima to a large extent throughout the Church, because his Secretary of State, Casseroli, who is an atheist as far as I'm concerned, he exercised himself as Secretary of State through all Vatican representatives to suppress Fatima as much as possible. For instance, the apostolic delegate in Lisbon and his entire staff were very favourable to Fatima. Casseroli changed them all and put in somebody who was not sympathetic. And so on and went on like that. So why is it that these three popes, the last three popes, refused? And when John Paul II was asked to now consecrate Russia, no, all he could do was kneel in St. Peter's Square, and in the middle of a consecration of the human race, the Immaculate Heart of Mary, he said, and also we consecrate to her care the people who are awaiting their consecration to her Immaculate Heart. What sort of gobbledygook is that? For me, that's gobbledygook, and disgusts me on John Paul II's lips. He's supposedly a knight of the Immaculate Queen. He's supposedly a member of Maximilian Kolbe's group of knights fighting, and he wouldn't do this. So I mean, I think it all goes back to Lucifer. He just has too much power within the prelacy of the Church, within the organization. He's able to squeeze everybody who attempts something.
And so Lucifer has paralyzed whatever efforts there have been, let's say, to do what the Mother of God actually wanted.
Yeah, this is the Queen of Heaven. And even if John XXIII said Nikita Khrushchev will declare war on us, he can say, well, you want this done, you must have some plan. Trust. No trust. No trust. So I think it is clear to me that the will of Christ is that these three popes should destroy the organization of the Church, which they have. They've destroyed the organization. They've been instrumental. And they will answer for it. And in the case of John Paul II and John XXIII and Paul VI, it's malfeasance in high office. They're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to take care of that. They didn't.
So to get back then to the original question, the reason why John Paul II's geopolitical strategy ultimately failed to bring, let's say, the spiritual fruits that he would have wanted is because he used the methods that weren't prescribed by Our Lady.
That's right. That's why he wasn't relying on purely spiritual means. Purely spiritual means. And therefore, and he didn't do what she said. She said, consecrate Russia to my Immaculate Heart, all you bishops, on the same day, using the same formula if possible. Do it.